This is going to be lesson 16. The topic that we're going to be talking about are transnational crime organizations, or what we call TCOs. Your objectives for lesson 16 are describe what is transnational organized crime, describe the global threat of transnational organized crime organizations, identify 6 emerging types of crime transnational crime or TCO groups are engaged in. Compare and contrast traditional organized crime to contemporary TCO. On slide 3 here, I have a link. It's an annual report. It's the United Nations report on transnational organized crime. It's very comprehensive. There's a number of resources or links to additional information or resources within this report. I strongly advise you looking at this, go over it and click on some of these links to get additional information. But it's a very comprehensive report. To start off with, we're going to have to define what transnational organized crime is. And a little description from Wikipedia is that it's organized crime coordinated across national borders. So basically it's a global phenomenon. It just isn't regulated to one particular country. It involves every country in the world for the most part. The National Institute for Justice, it's a independent body that does a number of different research projects for the government. They defined transnational organized crime involving the planning and the execution of illicit business ventures by groups and networks of individuals working in more than one country. These groups use systematic violence and corruption to achieve their goals. Crimes commonly include money laundering, human smuggling, cybercrime, human trafficking, drugs, weapons, endangered species, body parts, or nuclear material. We will talk a little bit more about what we find some emerging crimes that TCOs are involved in, and that'll come later on in this presentation and lecture. Transnational organized crime encompasses both traditional and non-traditional organized crime. You have some very established organized criminal groups that fit into our definition and schematic, if you will, of what consists of traditional organized crime. Defined hierarchical structures involved in the usual corruption, extortion, violence, all associated with that. But with new technology, we're also finding a different non-traditional group that is making not only its appearance, but making successful headway in the different criminal enterprises that they're engaged in. So you could look at this description here. Transnational criminals often operate in well-organized groups. For the most part, they do. They also intentionally carry out illegal actions. So, I mean, that definition of organized crime comes into play that we've talked about in the past. The groups have certain hierarchies and are headed by a powerful leader. That doesn't necessarily abide with what we're currently seeing. Take Russian organized crime. There is no one leader for Russian organized crime, just as there is no one leader for American organized crime. It's made up of a number of different networks and factions. So even though some of the subunits, if you will, may have very defined and strict hierarchies, as a whole, transnational organized crime in all these countries really don't. It's made up of a conglomerate of illegal organizations that are engaged and sometimes operating collectively and other times operating independently. But we know they're in existence to make a profit through their illegal activities. And because they operate internationally, it's a problem for law enforcement to address these issues. They're also influencing new emerging nations that we find that have come out of some old established countries and empires. They're affecting the economy and the economic growth and the societies in these different countries, and it's become a real problem. It's something the UN is trying to set up programs to help alleviate these conditions, but it is a real problem for every country globally. It's a global phenomenon. It's a global problem. We know that the criminal rings are becoming more powerful and universal. I mean, they're spreading their tentacles throughout other countries, particularly when you look at Russian organized crime. I mean, you have a very defined group that have emerged out of Russia after the collapse of the Soviet Union, but they also have made headway into former Soviet Federation countries, if you will, like Latvia, Lithuania, Estonia, the Ukraine, Belarus, some of these other older, or not, or some of these newer countries from old Russia that are emerging over the past 30 years are having a real distinct problem with organized crime emanating out of Russia. So looking at Russia, according to the National Institute of Justice, there's around 200 Russian groups that operate in nearly 60 countries worldwide. That's a study that was done. So it shows you the far-reaching effects that's happened with the collapse of the Soviet Union and with the emergence of so-called democracy. You have a number of these different Russian mafia groups that have existed for hundreds of years. Now, initially in Russia, we found that a lot of these organized criminal groups were put into the gulags, or the prisons, if you will, in Russia during the Soviet Union's reign of power. There was a group called, it's called Vori v. Zakoni. It's loosely interpreted meaning thieves in law. And this is according to the FBI, the Bureau of Investigation, and their website, and talking about Eurasian criminal enterprise. And according to the FBI, they were career criminals who banded together for support and profit in the Soviet prison system. And then during the Soviet period, their leaders, or who they call shop managers, were illicitly paid a 30% margin to acquire scarce consumer goods and divert raw materials and finished goods from production lines that they were working on as prisoners for the benefit of what you call the nomenclatura, or it's the educated elite and high-ranking criminals that lived in Soviet society. In 1991, when the Soviet Union collapsed, members of this criminal group allied themselves with corrupt public officials. The Communist Party was extremely corrupt. I mean, the true philosophy of Lenin and Marx was thrown out the window and diluted over the years, and you found a number of high-ranking public officials in the Communist Party lived quite a, how we would describe it as a bourgeoisie life, meaning that they lived a very comfortable existence, unlike the rest of their countrymen. So once the Soviet Union collapsed, they didn't have much left. They'd lost their positions, so they ended up turning towards organized crime in order to offset their social ranking, and they were in a position to take over a lot of these marketing and factories, taking over areas that contain natural resources and take them over. So once all those industries or resources were being privatized, it gave the syndicates time to take these over and create a cash flow and create opportunities to launder this money that was coming in for criminal proceeds. Boris Yeltsin actually said that in 1993 He was the first elected president of the Federation of Russia, and he said, organized crime has become the number one threat to Russia's strategic interest and to national security. Corrupted structures on the highest level have no interest in reform, end of quote. You see that today, however, Vladimir Putin, he is a pretty corrupt individual, and he has got the power to have, he makes money off of these organized criminal groups. So, I mean, he's corrupt as any of these organized criminal groups were. In the 70s, you found when the Soviet Union was still in power, they did the same thing that the Cubans did back in the late 70s, early 80s, where they emptied out their prisons and gulags, which contained a lot of these organized criminals, and allowed them to immigrate to Europe and to the United States. And of course, we opened our arms and welcomed them to join American society. But what we did was create a different organized criminal group that came into this country. So with the newfound freedom and the lax laws we had compared to Russia, these groups ended up creating major criminal groups to expand. And when the Soviet Union collapsed, the people were in our region were allowed to move about freely and to return to Russia. So these groups in Russia have defrauded the government of billions of dollars, particularly in these emerging countries like I mentioned earlier, like Ukraine, the Uzbekistan, Kazakhstan, Lithuania, Estonia, Latvia, all these countries that were part of the former Soviet Union. They all declared independence, and now you had the organized criminal element going in and totally disrupting the economy of these nations. We find in the United States with Russian organized crime, they're heavily involved in healthcare fraud, or it's, let's see, I think I got a slide here. Okay, yeah, they're heavily involved in healthcare fraud, auto insurance fraud. A number of these, you got about 11 of them here are the major things that they're involved in, but that certainly their activity isn't limited to those. Going back to just finishing up here with the Russian organized crime, there's a couple links here and on this previous slide regarding the Russian mafia, Russian transnational crime organizations. So click on those links. Asian transnational organized crime is certainly a problem. This link here goes to an FBI report on Asian organized crime, and you can break down Asian organized crime in a number of different ways, depending on the different regions in which it comes out of. First, what you need to do is break down what is a triad and a tong. These come from the National Institute of Justice and the FBI. And a triad, basically, it's a criminal group. It's an ancient organization that existed in China, that were based in Hong Kong, Taiwan, Macau, and some of these areas. They controlled illicit goods and services. So they were secret agencies, secret organizations that existed. A lot of it was social, because you have to remember China had been invaded throughout the centuries, numerous times. And you had ethnic groups living in particular areas of China that were subjugated by these different invading groups. So they created these triads, were a secret society. Some were revolutionary in nature, some were religious, some were social, and you always had a underground organized criminal element that had their own triad. So when you look at the communist takeover, similar to the Soviet Union, the communists ended up imprisoning a lot of these people that were involved in these secret societies. Unlike the Soviet Union, China hasn't had a completely democratic takeover and makeup. Now, They recognized that communism does not work in a competitive world market, if you will. So they have become much more capitalized than I think Chairman Mao had intended them ever to become. And they're obviously a player on the world market. But as a result, it's also created that freedom and that ability for Asian or Chinese triads to come back into power and become part of this Asian organized, transnational organized criminal element. Now, when you talk about the Tongs, these were social organizations similar in China that were developed in Chinese immigrant society. We had a large influx of Chinese that came to this country in the late 1800s, early 1900s. They were instrumental in building the railroads, particularly from the West Coast east. But as a result, you had these secret underground societies. Many of them, the makeup were criminal in nature. So most of your Tongs right now in America are made up of street gangs, but they're very sophisticated and they're formally allied with different triad groups in mainland China and Taiwan. There's other Asian groups coming out of Japan, the Yakuza. You got Korean. You've got groups coming out of Thailand, Laos, Cambodia, the Philippines, Vietnam. These are all Asian groups that obviously ally themselves with ethnic immigrants here in our country as part of their, own country. So we're going to talk about those. So like I just mentioned, your Asian TCO have ties to China, Korea, Japan, Thailand, Philippines, Cambodia, Laos, Vietnam. Those are the major. There are some from Indonesia, Malaysia. I mean, just about every country has a form of transnational organized crime, but these are the major players that we find here in this country. And your triads rely on this extensive network. It's a very sophisticated network. It's very close knit. It's not very easily penetrable, which makes it a big problem for law enforcement. They're fluid, they're extremely mobile. They adapt to both law enforcement and societal changes. So they're constantly reinventing themselves depending on what is available and how much pressure is being put on them. One of the big things is that they really promote multilingual abilities, meaning whatever country they're operating in, they try to learn the language and adapt and utilize those assets and the knowledge of the country and its cultural history, if you will, to be able to operate freely and not draw a lot of attention to themselves. Like I said before, you have two types of transnational organized crime. It's just not limited to Asian transnational organized crime. But we're going to center on two Chinese criminal enterprises. You got traditional, which is your Chinese triads, and the Japanese Yakuza. Now, your non-traditional would incorporate your Asian Tong gangs, Chinese Tongs, which are a variety of street gangs that don't quite adhere to the traditional form of organized crime or the triads, meaning you've got that structured hierarchy, you've got different attributes that we attribute organized crime to possess. We're finding these Tong groups are much more fluid, much more networky, less hierarchical in nature. They're constantly evolving and they're constantly changing. So they're morphing into the conditions that they find themselves in. Now, Asian criminal enterprises, this is the majority, but it's simply, it's not complete. I'm sure they're involved in many other things, but you can see there's a list of 14 of them right there, from extortion to arms trafficking. One of the newer things that is happening, particularly with the Chinese groups, is the trafficking in human organs. That's a new concept that's coming out. We'll talk about it in a little bit, but it's a new phenomena that's paying big dividends. Japanese Yakuza. This is an ancient Japanese underground criminal group. They're involved in multinational criminal activities, particularly with human trafficking, gambling, prostitution, and undermining illicit, and I'll have to correct this, undermining illicit businesses. They take it over. They use them for, money laundering capabilities. Here's a link to Yakuza. It's a Wikipedia link, and it will give you a fairly complete detail resource as to what the Yakuza consists of. Your Chinese organized crime, and again, another link here. Taiwanese, I'm sorry. It is a pretty good report on how extensive Taiwanese organized crime is. It's pretty incredible when you look at it. This one particularly from the fact that there's so many political people that are members of this Taiwanese organized crime group. So that makes it a little bit different than a lot of other organized crime groups, even though we have a lot of corruption in our political system as well as other countries that are getting bought off by the crime groups. They're not actual memberships. They're not card-carrying members of these specific groups like you see here in Taiwan. There was a report saying that there's a large percentage of political figureheads, mayors, governors, so on and so forth, people that have some pretty major political power that are actual members, gang members of this organized crime group, which is pretty incredible. So they have definitely infiltrated the government. So you can see how that's going to affect any type of global enforcement from the UN or pressure from the United States or any other country to help offset this. It just isn't going to happen. La Cosa Nostra, I don't know if we really need to talk in detail about this. I mean, you know about the Italian mafia. Now, the thing is, people say they're disappearing, they're dissolving with the advent of the Mexican cartels. They're the most powerful groups in the world. Well, yeah, maybe right now, but the mafia isn't going away. I mean, it's one of the oldest groups that exist. They're reinventing themselves despite the amount of purges that have happened over in Italy. We certainly have taken off a large portion or percentage of the not membership, but the leadership of these mafia groups here in the United States. But like anything else, they're self-perpetuating. So you're finding they're still in existence. Now, President Obama recently has opened up some of the trade restrictions with Cuba. And right before Cuba became communistic back in the late 50s, the leader of, or the president of Cuba at the time, Juan Bautista, was negotiating openly with the mafia to set up hotels and gambling casinos over there. That's happening again. The mafia is in direct negotiation with Cuban leadership, political people, and they are close to making inroads into dropping a lot of money into developing casinos, resorts, so on and so forth. So if you find that Cuba is going to start building up, you can bet that the mafia is back in there, and they want to reap the benefits of the gambling operations that Cuba once had and was planning to increase. It's going to be probably take over from Atlantic City, and it'll give Las Vegas a run for its money if that happens. Your Indian TCOs, you don't hear a lot, but they're an extensive group. They're a very sophisticated underground group. They're involved in illicit drug trafficking, money laundering. Obviously, the hallmarks of organized crime are involved in violence and extortion, corruption, trafficking women and children for both work and for prostitution related. They're big into white collar crime, credit card fraud, computer related crime. illegal trafficking of stolen vehicles, industrial espionage, you name it. I mean, but they are a pretty sophisticated group. Now, Mumbai is the capital. It's also the commercial capital of the country. So you'll find a lot of these. This one particular group is centered. One of the major players, and I can't pronounce his name, Varadaj Mudaliar. He came to power in the early '60s, but he was called the grandfather of Indian organized crime. But if you go anywhere in the world, particularly like the Mid East and the Far East, you'll find that Indian merchants are usually part of the middle class society in any country you're going to go to. They are the ones that basically have a vast majority of the businesses that operate in and around countries worldwide. They're heavily involved in gold exchange, so you have jewelry marts. They buy and sell gold, and that's one of their major industries. And you'll find that Indian organized crime has a grip on those different enterprises. So, but after this guy ended up dying. You had, the gold smuggling, the drug dealing, obviously ended up becoming very big and supporting the transnational organized crime enterprises. So you've had new gangs emerging as a result of this guy dying, and so certainly has increased. This Darwood Ibrahim gang supposedly is the most dreaded mafia gang in India. And they've got foreign connections. And you'll find they have a lot of connections in the Mideast, as well as globally. We've got, obviously, connections or resource links here. But, they're involved in violent crime, just like any other organized criminal operation. They're involved in assault, murder, ideological crimes such as terrorism. Your arms trafficking, arson, coercion, extortion, protection rackets, sexual assault. So violent crime is certainly a method that's employed. They're extremely involved in financial crime. Your money laundering, remittance services, meaning cashing in on loans or what have you. Counterfeiting and tax evasion. So, I mean, they're not paying taxes, or they're getting out of paying taxes in the countries that they're operating in. Transnational organized crime, cybercrime is huge. Your identity theft, copyright infringement, cyber warfare, computer viruses. These are all generating out of transnational organized crime groups. So when you say identity theft, you can also say that goes hand in hand with passports. Political corruption, corporate crime. I mean, these are all avenues that we know organized crime is involved in, and transnational is no different. Ecological crime. So you have environmental. These guys don't care about the environment, so they'll go in and completely clear cut a forest if it means selling off exotic woods. The killing, the poaching, the transfer of exotic animals, skins, internal organs for medicinal purposes, exotic fish sales. You name it, they're involved in it because there is a demand, particularly in the Far East, for elephant tusk, rhino horn, tiger, whatever, bear gallbladder. I mean, all these things are a cash cow for them. I mean, it takes a lot of money to buy this stuff. It's also kind of it's an ego boost. These guys that have money, they can afford to buy these things. A lot of times it's just used for show. So it's just a total waste. And to me, it's absolutely heartbreaking. You got geological crimes happening where you've got blood diamonds for sale. You've got exotic gems being pilfered out of different areas. There's another thing I wanted to mention. I'm going to put this under white collar crime. Um, or no, let's put it under trafficking. Uh, you also have cultural heirlooms. How do you spell that? Yeah, it's not right, but let's see. Let's correct it here. There we go. Cultural heirlooms. Now, what I mean by that, you got your drug trafficking obviously being number one, and then you've got. Let's reduce this in size. Doggone it. There we go. You got drug trafficking, human sex trafficking, illegal immigration, and people smuggling. So, um, your labor, your unfree labor, etc. But the cultural heirlooms, I mean, that's when let's say there's a country that's just emerging. Well, look at what's happening in Iraq right now. You've got civil war, you've got ISIS trying to take over, you've got a number of different political factions that are at war with one another. So consequently, the protection of these cultural heirlooms in museums, such as statues, paintings, sculptures, cultural heritage sites, are just being destroyed. They're being stolen. They're being shipped out of the country, and they're being sold on the black market. So, from an archaeological standpoint, that's a disaster into itself. And I know Iraq, being one of the oldest civilized countries in the world, dating back to millennium, it's losing its national identity with the loss of these cultural heirlooms, and they're going to end up on a shelf or whatever, a conversation piece of some rich, organized crime figure who knows nothing about it. So I mean, that's a big problem. Uh, so your emerging list of crimes that these organizations are involved in. Cybercrime, that's not that new, but I mean, it's constantly evolving with new technology. Your ID related crimes, so the theft of identity theft, but also with passport fraud. And that's huge because of the security implications of potential terrorists coming into different countries. You're trafficking in cultural property, and that's what I was just talking about in cultural heirlooms, is when you're stealing different physical tangible objects out of a country and robbing them of their cultural and national identity. Your environmental crime, we've talked about that. Piracy, the open seas, West Africa is huge. Somalia has been big, but we've cracked down on that. But there's more piracy going on in the west part of Africa, off of Liberia and that coast there, than there is over on the Horn of Africa. Human or organ trafficking sounds pretty sick, but there's a big market for transplanting human organs. When somebody's organs are failing, they need a transplant. You can see what the implications are when human organs, or people actually selling their organs, like a kidney or something, happens in China, and selling it to operators on the black market so somebody could get an organ. You can imagine how desperate people may be for an organ where their health is failing. They're facing the possibility of dying. So, and if they have the money, they'll pay what the going rate will be in the sale of these human organs. You may even get to a point where people are being killed for their organs, and I know that's happening in the Far East and the Middle East. So it's a dangerous situation, not only for society, but it changes the complexion medically for people that are on a wait list, legitimately trying to get an organ and not being able to get it. So it's a huge problem. It's kind of gross, but it just kind of shows you where we've gone with this thing. It's definitely going to be a defining issue for our century. The Cold War was the defining issue in the last century, the 20th century, but you're going to find it. Transnational crime organizations are going to proliferate because they're the beneficiaries of this globalization and technology. They can take advantage of the travel trade, rapid money movements, telecommunication, computer links. So they're positioned for growth. They are definitely a factor to deal with for us and basically for our children. You have Interpol that exists. You got the FBI, obviously. You got an international criminal court. You've got the UN. These are organizations that are dedicated and directed towards fighting international organized crime organizations. But the problem is with a lot of countries, and take Taiwan for example, you're going to have governments that aren't going to cooperate. And if that happens, it's going to create a safe haven for these groups to hide behind. So you need to get a complete buy-in. Now, I know the UN, the United States, and some major European nations are trying to offset some of the money that these corrupted officials are getting bought off with by giving these countries aid, money, etc. We'll see how much is pilfered by the political groups, but I don't know. We don't have dispendable cash or disposable cash like a lot of these organized crime groups have. They don't have the different debts that we have accumulated, as well as different resources that we need to maintain within countries. So we have a budget that does all that. They don't. So they've got the money to buy off governments. Okay. So you got the UN. So these last few slides here basically talk about law enforcement's response. So you can see what the problems are. You can go to these different websites and resources, particularly Wikipedia, and see what the United States, the FBI, different law organizations are doing to help combat transnational organized crime. But it's a problem. It's going to continue to be a problem in this century, and it's a global issue that everybody's going to have to come together on and address.